Welcome back, everyone. So on this video, we're gonna try to be professional. I'm gonna try to be professional because I think I've already pissed these guys off. I'm gonna give you a short little explanation on that here in just a second. So I left a comment on the video I'm about to be criticizing, and believe me, it does need to be criticized. Even if they're right, they need to get back to the drawing board and do something different because what they're saying in the video doesn't make sense. I've posted a series of questions, sort of a criticism based on this study. That, for one, the study they cite is flawed in many ways, and I'll talk about that. But just what they go through in the video itself, I don't even need to have the level of medical education that they have to debunk their claim because it's just that bad. It just doesn't make any sense. And repeatedly, over and over and over again, when discussing the opiate epidemic, when we talk about chronic pain patients and the CDC 2016 opiate prescribing guidelines and taking away opiate pain medications from chronic pain patients, there seems to be a constituent of people that is never explained, never talked about, and never gone over. And it's very frustrating because it's like, well, how do you explain it? Because according to everything that these academics claim, that it's never answered. And it doesn't make sense from what they're claiming. It's like it should never happen, but it does. And it's actually quite a large amount of people that they can't account for. And I find that interesting. And that's something that needs to be answered, especially if you're doing legitimate science. And this video is coming from an academic YouTube channel. It's coming from what do we got here? The Center for Medical Education. And the thing is that these guys, like, I left this comment and it was up for a while, and all the comments that are on the video still had been there when I commented. Suddenly my comment is gone though, and everyone else's that criticized the video is still there, but mine was removed. So I'm not going to show any clips from the video, and I'm going to try to be professional, even though I think I think professionalism is totally overrated. We know how to communicate. It's formalities is weird. So this is the what I posted, and I don't think it's offensive in any way, shape, or form. And I think that there are legitimate questions too. So what I said in regards to this video, what the comment that I made, I have it saved. I need to edit it because I've got some typos in here. But so it's, why in any of these studies are there no accounts of people who have been on long-term opiate pain management that have not succumbed to opiate use disorder, also known as OUD for short? I think that's a legitimate question. Are we saying that 94% of the chronic pain community is a statistical anomaly? Again, I don't think there's anything offensive about that, and I think that's a legitimate question. That 94% is the group of people in the chronic pain patient community that never gets talked about, and they never talk about it. 94% is a lot for it to be an anomaly. That would actually be the norm. And then the 6% that do succumb to OUD would be the anomaly. I don't think there's anything offensive about that. That's true that if 6% of chronic pain patients that go on long-term opioid use medication for pain management If only 6% of them develop OUD, and that means 94% aren't. That means they're 90. They're saying that that's an anomaly. No, that's not an anomaly. 94% is the norm. That's the majority. 6% is the anomaly. And I'm not saying that people who have OUD are bad people. I'm just saying that statistically, the smaller percentage is the anomaly and the larger percentage is the norm. I went on to say, why are we not exploring the idea of using opiate antagonists or agonists like duloxetine, Suboxone, and methadone to treat OUD? Instead, we're putting these medications on a prescribing hold for doctors to use them to treat OUD. So what I'm saying in there, duloxetine, Suboxone, if you don't know, you're only allowed to prescribe 200. Doctors can only prescribe 270 or 275 prescriptions of it per year. And that's a regulation that has been tied down to those medications to doctors. Those medications are used to treat OUD. And they're very, very effective. People who have OUD, people who are addicted to heroin, they get a lot of use out of duloxetine and Suboxone, and they're very, very effective. And then methadone is this whole other thing. There's a reason why methadone is usually only found in a methadone clinic, is because there's so many legal loopholes to jump through in order to dispense it and prescribe it. It's crazy. I would say methadone is probably more easily accessible to people who suffer from OUD and heroin addiction than duloxetine and Suboxone. But getting rid of the regulations on duloxetine and Suboxone that have been delivered by the DEA and the CDC of only 270 prescriptions or 275 prescriptions of it per year would be helpful to people who suffer from OUD or heroin addiction, because that's what those medications can be used for. They make it so that if you take an opiate, like an actual opiate, not another agonist or antagonist, that the opiate won't work, and it also makes it so they don't have any withdrawal symptoms. So very, very effective in treating heroin addiction and OUD. And we have medications like this with other things like alcohol and other SUDs, which is substance use disorders. I don't think there's anything offensive about that question. I think that's a legitimate question to ask. Why are we not utilizing the medications that we have available that can treat OUD and heroin addiction? Why is opiate addiction the only one exempt from this? And why are we comparing modern times with things from the past when they did not have drugs to treat OUD? Again, and you'll find out why I made that comment when I start talking about the video a little bit, but I think, again, that's not offensive. That's a valid question. I think the gross overuse of post hoc ergo propter hoc here is a legitimate inductive argument, thus a fallacy, and post hoc ergo propter hoc is an actual fallacy. And this is equating, it's saying because X happened, therefore Y. So in this particular instance, X could be Purdue Pharma, it could be opiate prescribing, that there, because pain medications have been prescribed, therefore the opiate epidemic. There's the rise of heroin use is up like 1,000%. I don't think it has anything to do with pain medication. I really don't. It's a fallacy. You have to show where you get that, and they just can't deliver. There's actually another fallacy, which is actually a appeal to tradition. Appeal to tradition is an argument in which a thesis is deemed correct on the basis of correlation with past or present tradition. An appeal to tradition is only fallacious in itself if the argument where was I? Because it's always been done that way. Okay, but So again, I don't think there's anything offensive about that. I think that's a legitimate critique. Comparing what we have today with what someone, or sorry, I'm adding words, comparing what we have today with someone that said something a long time ago does not prove your position is correct. That's absurd, and if subjected to peer review, would be rejected. Again, I don't think there's anything offensive about that, and I think that's a valid criticism, which they do this in the video. They they make the claim that they they say opiates are bad, and we can prove it. They went back in history. They found somebody from Greek Roman Empire days that said opiates were poison. They found somebody from different, particularly I remember from the video, somebody from the 1800s, possibly early 1900s, saying something about opiates being bad and being a poison. And they're like, aha, they knew it back then, so it must be correct. Just because they thought something back in the day doesn't mean that it's automatically correct. And it's almost like implying that people back then were stupid. And if they knew that when they were stupid, then we should know it now. Well, that's a really disgusting way to rationalize something. People back in the day were not stupid. They had less access to information that we do today. I would also argue that people back in that time frame, you're talking about doctors that didn't even know how to declare if somebody was dead or not. 1800s, dealing with death in the 17, 1800s, early 1900s, up to the early 1900s is something that I've actually looked into quite a bit. And you can go back and you can look at my video on postmortem daguerreotypes, and you can see that those two books that I go over in that video are not the first books or the first introduction I've had to how death was handled and perceived and taken care of back in the mid 1800s up into the early 1900s. I've done quite a lot of reading on that. Doctors did not know how to pronounce. People were buried alive. One of the things that they used to do to try and find out if somebody was even dead was to lay them out and wait for putrefaction. If people didn't want to wait for that, they would try nipple clamps. They had nipple clamps specifically designed for this. They would cut the bottom of your feet. They'd look for blood cauterization, not cauterization, but congealment. Sometimes they'd put a beetle in your ear, like a live beetle. I don't know why. But, sometimes people were pronounced dead, and incorrectly so. There's actually a name of somebody that was recorded that I forget, Ellen something or other. This happened in 1860. This girl was adopted by a woman, and the girl that she had adopted one day collapsed on the floor, stopped breathing. They thought she was dead. They buried her that night. The woman who adopted her had a dream that she was in her coffin, like kicking and screaming in horror and clawing at the sides. She ran. She got the people to unearth her. And when they opened the coffin, she had a horrified look on her face, and she had been clawing at the coffin to the point where her fingers were broken and bleeding and all the way to the bone. And she was dead at that point. She had died in the coffin. She woke up and died in it. And they figured, oh shit, we buried her alive. Oh wait, we're trying to keep this professional. I shouldn't say oh shit, but I did. So yeah, I don't know that, just because somebody said something in the past or had a critique. I'm sure you could find plenty of doctors that would have positive things to say about the use of opiates to pain management treatment as well. So finding examples of people who were against it, well, you can do that for almost about anything. That doesn't really prove any point. It just shows that somebody shared the same opinion as you in the past. Also, it would seem another inductive reasoning fallacy here is starting with a conclusion, which is that opiates are bad and that you'll become addicted no matter what you do, and that you'll overdose. It's almost inevitable that opiate medications are responsible for the opiate epidemic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a conclusion. And then they dig for data. So they do data mining for statistics to build a premise rather than following data to build a premise to come up with a conclusion. That's a real problem. Like, I don't need to be a medical professor to tell you that that's just not how we do science. That's not how we do it. We don't say opiates are bad and I'm going to set out to prove it. We know that opiates are addictive. We know that you can overdose on it. That's not a secret to anyone that has a brain and lives on Earth and has existed in reality. I mean that's not a secret. That's ridiculous to even suggest so. We know that. The problem here is that we have a rise of heroin use and we want to find out why. So instead of starting with that, saying we have a rise of heroin use, why? Let's follow data and see why there's so much heroin use today. And I think if you did that, you'd be following down a path of sort of an existential crisis, a huge economic decline, which rampant drug use, escapism, hedonism is very, very popular in times of economic crisis, societal collapse, epidemics, pandemics, that kind of thing. You can read all about that from bubonic plague. We're sort of repeating history on that. I'm not making the same appeal that they are. I'm saying that we're seeing a pattern. So that is just not how we do science. That's not how we do logic and critical thinking. You do not start with a conclusion and then find data to support that conclusion. That is sort of a confirmation bias. That's incorrect. That's not what you do. They need to get back to the drawing board on that one. That is seriously a no-no in academia in its entirety. That's not what you do. You start with a premise. You gather data to build a premise, and that data will lead you to a conclusion. And then I back that up by saying starting with a conclusion and looking only for data that supports your conclusion is, for one, not scientific, illogical, a logical fallacy, and two, it's how witch trials were done. You're a witch, prove me wrong. And one cannot prove a negative. And that's the problem with it. It's sort of a confirmation bias, like that's exactly what happened in the witch trials is that they started with a conclusion, this person's a witch. Okay, well, how do we prove that? Well, anything we want, really, but it comes from, like, let's look for a mark. Oh, they have a birthmark. Boom, they're a witch. And then you ask the person, okay, show me that you're not a witch. How does a person prove that they don't have magical powers? I mean, you can't. So given that, how on earth is this considered a quote-unquote study when it can't explain or take into account the statistical anomalies? Again, I don't think there's anything offensive about that. I don't think I don't think that there's anything illegitimate about what I'm posing or any criticism that I'm having or any question that I'm having. I think it's all legitimate. I don't think there's anything offensive about it. I think they are hard questions to answer, and that may be certainly true, especially because they are starting with a conclusion and then building their premise on that. How is this considered science when there's no accurate peer review? And the study that they use to back their claim it is full of flaws. I think it's called the Zulu study. The problem with that study is that it was done by Anna Lemke. And first of all, in that study, they used an opiate medication. They used tramadol. Tramadol is an opiate medication. They used it in that study. Second of all, they only studied men. Second of all, they did not study any chronic pain condition other than arthritis, which arthritis is characterized by inflammation. And it can be solved with an anti-inflammatory, especially a really strong anti-inflammatory. Then you get pretty good results pretty quick. So the study that they're using to quote has a lot of problems. They only used men. They only used people with arthritis. And in fact, if anyone said that they were a chronic pain patient and had been on opiate pain medications, they were immediately thrown out of the study, in the study that they cite. So the study also used opiate pain medications. They used tramadol. The only opiate pain medications that they exempted from the study were things like Oxycontin, Percocet, which is just another brand of Oxycontin, or oxycodone, hydrocodone, Vicodin, that kind of thing. So then finally, how is this considered a logical argument when it's almost nothing but inductive reasoning and logical fallacies? And again, I don't think that there's anything offensive about anything I said. I think I'm asking legitimate questions that deserve a legitimate answer. And I really am pointing at that they do need to get back to the drawing table on this. So on these percentages that I'm giving, it might be a little bit confusing because the way that they and I will leave the link to the video. You are free to go and peruse through it yourself. I can't show any clips of it. I'm not going to even try. I'm not going to risk it. But these two people, they claim that the way that the numbers are done is so backwards. It's okay. So if you got a group of heroin addicts together, so people who suffer from OUD, but specifically heroin, they ask these people who are on heroin, how did you start? And so apparently 4 out of 5 people who are on heroin will say that they started using opiate pain medications. Oh, but what they don't tell you, first of all, what they don't tell you is when in that study is that the pain medications that a lot of these heroin addicts are talking about were illicitly taken pain medications. That is to say that they were acquired illegally off the street. They were taken from family members. They weren't prescribed to them, or they were taken not as prescribed. So they even it's illicit use if it's prescribed to you and you're only supposed to take one every 6 hours, let's say, but the person is taking 4 every 4 hours. It's taking it illicitly. That's abusing it. So they don't tell you that. And that is actually the real statistic behind it. And the statistics I'm telling you are backed by academia. These are studies that are coming out of Ivy League universities. So I don't know what they're talking about. Another cute little thing that they did in this video that I thought was really interesting is they said that academics, they showed a picture of these academic people on this tower, and there were all these people below them, and they made the claim, okay, these people up here think they're right because they're doing all the studies. They're really intelligent, well-educated people, but they don't work with the people down at the bottom, so they have no idea how it works in real practice. So therefore, they're operating blindly almost. Well, if you actually go around and you talk to chronic pain management specialists or pain management specialists and doctors that constantly work with chronic pain patients all the time in the real world, you don't come to the same conclusion that these two doctors have come to the conclusion of. Most doctors acknowledge the fact that when it comes to pain management therapy, opiate pain medications are about as good as they get. And doctors are even complaining about the fact, and this is quoted from a investigative journalist that went through and was talking about the opioid epidemic. There's something you can find through a program called LEAD out of Kings County, Seattle. What is that where it was? Yeah, Kings County, Seattle. There's a program out there called LEAD. One of the problems that the LEAD counselors are having problems with their heroin addicts is getting them into a doctor that can actually prescribe them Suboxone because of these rules and regulations in place on opiate pain medications or medications in general. And it's really not helpful because a lot of these people who are in the lead program, they do want to get clean. Some of them respond well to methadone, but others respond better to things like Suboxone and duloxetine. And they have to go on a waiting list to get these medications. So that's what you hear from the doctors that are actually working in the field. But these two academics that claim that those people that are working with actual heroin addicts and people who suffer from OUD and actual chronic pain patients, they're wrong because they're not working with the actual people. But these guys that are sitting in an office do. I find that interesting. Actually, kind of like when they made the statement, it's almost like, well, you might want to look in the mirror on that one. So that's interviewing the heroin addicts, they say that. So that's 4 out of 5. Well, that makes it sound like, oh my God, if you're prescribed opiate pain medications, 4 out of 5 chronic pain patients that are prescribed opiates are going to develop OUD and start using heroin. That's a cute twist of the number. No, actually, it's the number I gave you that's being quoted out of Brown, Yale, Ivy League universities. And you can even find this if you talk to a doctor outside of their workforce, because the CDC would shish kebab their job if they told you this. But only 6% of chronic pain patients that go on opiate pain management regimen, only 6%, develop OUD, and their life spirals out of control and they start using heroin. Only 6%. That means 94% of chronic pain patients that go on an opiate pain management regimen do not develop OUD and do not ever go to illicit substances like heroin. 94%. And if you think about it, that really makes sense, especially moving through the 90s and before the opiate epidemic. The majority of people have been prescribed an opiate at some point in their life due to surgery, due to dental work. They used to prescribe me Darvocet when I had tonsillitis infections. Not very much, mind you, because the antibiotic that they would give me, would work within 48 hours of taking it. My fever would go down. So they would only give me enough Darvocet for that period of time, for that first 48 hours until the antibiotic made it so that it wasn't painful anymore. They stopped doing that, though, at some point. It wasn't a big deal because, I don't have OUD. So that's really interesting. So the thing that I have a problem with in all of this is that there are examples out there. There are people out there. People who have, let's say, at one point or one part of their life been addicted to heroin, and let's say they spent a year and a half using heroin and injecting $20 worth of heroin into their veins every day, which is quite a lot. And then they did this for a year and a half, and they say, you know what, I'm getting clean, because this is ruining my life. I'm spending so much money on it. I've gotten to the point where it's become the center of my world. It's what I wake up for, that kind of thing. And they say, this is damaging my life. I'm going to get clean. And then let's say like several years, it could be 4 years later, 12 years later, somewhere down the line, they develop a chronic pain condition and they go on opiate pain medications and they use them responsibly and they don't develop back into that lifestyle of having opiate use disorder or using heroin or going out on the streets or abusing their medication, and actually take their medication responsibly. This study, these people that talk about these studies, they cannot account for these people. There's no explanation as to why this can happen. None. It's just doom and gloom. It's just, oh, nope, you're going to become a heroin addict. You're going to develop OUD. Your life is going to spiral out of control, and opiates are going to become the meaning of your life again. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You are forever an addict in recovery, no matter how long you've been clean, and they cannot explain these people. They cannot. Nothing that they say explains how these people can exist. Yet they do. Okay, these people are not unicorns. They're not fantasy. They're not fairy tales. These people literally exist. And yet there's no account of why this happens, and yet we're going to sit there and say, no, we like they have to lie about their past now because of the 2016 CDC guidelines and people like these two doctors. And I don't know why they can't explain this. I think if they did I would think if they did a legitimate study in academia that was scientifically sound, logically sound, and not full of fallacies like these two, they would be able to account for this and explain for this as to why someone can spend a year and a half legitimately addicted to heroin, get clean, and then 12 years down the line get a chronic pain condition, get prescribed opiate pain medications, use them responsibly, and then maybe even go through a surgery where they don't need the pain medications anymore and stop taking them, and not revert back to their old lifestyle where they were shooting or putting $20 worth of heroin in their veins every day. There's no account for this. These are not fake people. These are real stories. Or why it is that you have somebody with a chronic pain condition that's been on opiate pain management for 20 years, and then boom, the 2016 guidelines happen. They don't go out on the street and seek out heroin or illicit pain medications. They don't start buying opiate pain medications illegally. They're frustrated because they're in pain all the time. And I mean, that's understandable. And they're trying the replacements or the alternatives to opiates, things like Cymbalta and gabapentin, amitriptyline, things like that. They're trying this stuff, ketamine infusions, which I think is really interesting because, again, this is something that they never want to talk about. They love to talk about addiction, but we don't want to talk about the two different types of addiction, that the it's fun, I want to do it again sort of addiction, and chemical dependency. And so the fun, it's fun, it causes euphoria addiction is what they like to call what do they call it? It's fun, I want to do it again. It has an inclination of abuse. It's something along those lines of what they say it's so if something has a tendency to be abused, so gabapentin doesn't have that going for it. Let's say, for example, like gabapentin doesn't have that, so it's not fun. And it's like, since it's not fun, it doesn't cause euphoria. There's habit forming. That's the term I'm looking for. It's not habit forming. Gabapentin isn't habit forming, but it does create chemical dependency, which is addiction. And people who are on gabapentin, especially long term, are afraid to get off of it because the withdrawals are extremely volatile and violent. And these people never want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about how the same applies to Cymbalta and amitriptyline. And they don't want to talk. And this really pissed me off when I found out about this, is that there is a grocery list of side effects that are medical concerns when it comes to gabapentin, Cymbalta, amitriptyline, ketamine infusions, and things like that. Repeated steroid injections. There's a plethora, a huge list of medical concerns from that. there's only one major medical concern when using opiate medications to treat pain, and that's constipation. Yeah, that irritates me, that none of that I just said is being taken into account when we have this conversation. They never talk about it. We don't want to talk about how gabapentin creates chemical dependency, even worse, reportedly, even worse than opiate medications, particularly opiate medications. Heroin addiction is a little bit different. Same with methadone. Methadone, I believe the withdrawals are quite a long time, like a month, maybe longer. Um, so some of the stronger opiates you're talking about, or opiate agonists or antagonists, might be a longer duration of withdrawal symptoms. But heroin, usually the withdrawal only lasts about a week. But when you're talking about opiate pain medications, let's take like tramadol or hydrocodone, for example, the withdrawals are about 3 or 4 days, and they're relatively mild symptoms, like maybe a little bit of sniffles or something like that. Again, something they never bring up. They don't talk about it. They don't talk about it. And I think it's because it defeats their argument of ultimately wanting to get rid of prescribing opiate pain medications altogether for pain management, period. They don't want them prescribed at all. They go as far as to make the claim that opiates actually cause pain. And I think that that's interesting because we know how opiates work. We know that they block pain receptors, and that's how they kill pain. We actually have reports that show that people who have had like severe surgeries and stuff like that go on opiate pain medications heal faster. So I find that very, very fascinating that they never bring these things up, and things that are well documented in medical science as well. They don't want to talk about that, but they love to talk about the addiction of opiates, but they don't want to talk about the chemical dependency or addiction of gabapentin, Cymbalta, and amitriptyline. I find that very fascinating. I find it hypocritical too, to be honest, and I think it's something that should go in to be included in their study if they're going to take this seriously. And anyone watching this video, if you're going to take people like this seriously, it's something you need to think about too. Is that the fact that they're not talking about this, I think, is a reason why anyone should not take them seriously, because you want to sit there and say something like gabapentin is fine, but you're not going to talk about how it's addictive too. Okay, interesting. Yeah, no. So that's why I bring up the 94%. Like, why is that considered an anomaly? As I'm basically saying, you've got people out there who have been on pain medications for 20 years. They don't spiral out of control. They don't develop OUD. They don't go to heroin. You have examples like that. You have examples of people who used to be heroin addicts or have opiate use disorder, and then they get clean, develop a chronic pain condition, and go on opiate pain management regimen and never develop OUD or succumb to using heroin again. And they have no account for this. I find that very problematic. I really do. So anyone watching this video, please feel free to inform me on the questions I'm posing and the critiques I'm posing, because I want answers to this. I find it very frustrating that they never talk about it. My own personal addiction, nicotine. So, where was I? That's another thing. So, in their video, I might have lost my place, but I'm still going to continue. In their video, when they bring up people in the past who were critics of using opiates for pain management in the past, they bring up the opiate epidemic thingy that happened in China a long time ago. But the thing is that, again, they're not bringing this up, is that we have medications that can treat OUD, that can treat heroin addiction and stuff like that. We have medications that do that. And we use medications for other addictions. Alcohol is a big one, alcohol addiction. And that's addiction on both levels, and that it's habit forming because it's fun. We like to do it. We want to do it again. I personally don't like alcohol, but it's also produces a chemical dependency. So it's got both, and we don't make it illegal, and we don't blame it on things. And we have medications to treat alcohol addiction, and because honestly, alcohol withdrawals can kill you. There's a alternative medication that they use for pain instead of opiates, where the chemical dependency on it too has that ability where the withdrawals alone can kill you. So again, that's something they don't talk about. I find that interesting. They're like, oh, this medication's better because it's not an opiate. Never mind that it creates a chemical dependency where if you stop taking it, it can kill you. Okay, that's interesting. I don't know why we're not talking about that. So why is that safer than using an opiate? Last I checked, opiate withdrawals don't kill you. They make you feel like you're going to die, but they don't kill you. And overdosing, you can overdose on you can overdose on salt. I mean, shit. Oh, sorry, we're not supposed to use shit. We're supposed to be professional. So another thing that I'm really frustrated about is this idea of getting rid of opiate medications in their entirety, as far as using them to treat chronic pain. A statistic, again, that is not being discussed. Opiate pain medications are at an all-time low as far as their prescribing rate. They're at 69, or dropped by 69%, something like that, maybe 70 something percent by now. But they're an all-time low on being prescribed. So heroin use has skyrocketed some ridiculous number. It's not 1,000%. That's like an overstatement, but it's up really high. I think it's more like 120% heroin use, but opiate pain medications are down. And here's the one that really frustrates me and pisses me off is that the chronic pain patient suicide rate is up 470%, because you have a lot of chronic pain patients out there that don't have access to adequate pain medication. That's very frustrating. And if you give chronic, and this is something that is contributing to things like tent cities and lack of job market, is because if you don't know, the majority of people who live in tent cities and live in homelessness are people with mental and physical disabilities. Well, guess what? If you give a chronic pain patient access to adequate pain management, their functionality increases, and as well as their quality of life. So there's a lot of people out there who are chronic pain patients not working right now that have made a mass exodus towards disability or early retirement, like retirement as early as 30, because they don't have access to adequate pain management medications, and they're not working. So, and then that's another question too, is that I don't think the doctors can answer this question. Can the state afford to have a mass exodus of all, like, thousands of chronic pain patients going on disability? Can the state pay for that? I don't think they can. Or can we just rip the rug out from underneath everyone's feet? I would say no. I would say if you wanted to handle this properly, then a better idea would be to start developing and funding research towards medication that is an analgesic that treats pain in a similar fashion as opiates without the euphoria. So you negate the abuse, and doesn't develop a chemical dependency. So I think that would be far more productive. Unfortunately, I don't know that you can have one without the other. I don't think you can have a true analgesic that functions the way that opiates do without the euphoria or the chemical. Well, actually, I guess we've developed medications that have worked on the chemical dependency. That's why we have opiate antagonists or agonists, things like Suboxone, duloxetine, and methadone. So there's that. So we have all these heroin addicts out there that are trying to get clean that can't get clean because they can't get access to Suboxone, duloxetine, methadone because of doctors like this and the CDC and Andrew Kolodny, which, by the way, Andrew Kolodny has been quoted saying that an entire generation of people will have to die before they can see the greatness of his work. That's almost quote verbatim something that Adolf Hitler said about disabled people. He felt that disabled people were useless to society because they were limited in their ability to work, and a lot of them were sent off to concentration camps. So I find that kind of a really messed up thing to say, and very heartless and very cruel. Another thing that Andrew Kolodny has been quoted saying is that you're better off dead than addicted. And personally, being the brother of someone, my little brother died from heroin addiction. He overdosed, and I would beg to differ. I would rather my brother be alive and addicted than dead, because you can fix addiction. You can't fix dead. Another problem that another thing that isn't being discussed on the table by doctors like this is making things like Narcan available over the counter instead of with a prescription. Why are we not discussing this? I think it's a valid thing to bring up. They love to bring up all these things of people that said bad, like that had critiques about opiates from the past, but these opiate agonists that can treat opiate use disorder and can treat heroin addiction weren't developed, I think, until somewhere in the mid 1900s. So of course, during the opiate epidemic from China, they didn't have access to these medications because they didn't exist then. And we have ways to treat it now with medications. We didn't back then. We do now. And these doctors are making the claim that our entire society will fall because of this. And that's why they think an entire generation has to die. Is that it's all addiction based, and that anyone who has a chronic pain condition that is asking for pain relief through opiate pain medication is just another addict. It doesn't actually fix pain; it just causes more pain. There is no study to support that. To support that opiates cause pain, there's no study to support that at all. So, I think I've raised a lot of valid criticism. I think I'm asking some valid questions. I don't think any of it is offensive. Am I an anti-prohibitionist? Yes. Yes, I am. And I would side with DULF, which I don't think drug users should be penalized. I don't think they should be treated like criminals. And I think people who want to get clean should be treated with love and care, not penalized by the system, and treated like the scum and squirm of the earth. I don't think that's acceptable. This is the 21st century, and we have access to medications that can treat addiction. So I have no idea why we would treat people like this. Why somebody, and you have to keep in mind the study that they cite in the video. And again, I will leave the link to the video. You can go and watch it. It's an hour long, but I encourage you to go and watch it and leave your own criticisms. Dislike it, and feel free to correct me if they're making valid points. I don't think they are. But what was I saying? But yeah, we have medications to treat addictions today. So we don't need to wait for an entire generation of people to die. we don't need to stop prescribing opiate medications. And I'm not so sure that opiate medications are responsible for the opiate epidemic or the rise of heroin use, as I've pointed out. Actually, if you go back to George W. Bush Jr.'s administration, when we went to war with Al Qaeda, ISIS, and what's the other one? Al Qaeda, ISIS, and I forget the name of the third one. But these are religious extremist groups that used to police opiate farmers in the Middle East. And when we went to war with those terrorist organizations, very religious fundamentalist extremist groups, they stopped policing the opium farmers. And of course, they're going to grow it because it's a cash crop. They make a lot of money doing it, and they did, and it flooded the entire Western civilization with a lot of heroin because these groups were no longer policing it. That's when we saw a huge spike in heroin use. And then the South American drug cartels got wind of this and picked up on it. Another part that has been contributing to the rise in heroin use is denying chronic pain patients access to adequate pain medication, because if they're not part of that 470% that is committing suicide, they're a part of a constituent of people that are turning to heroin, to street drugs. And one of the reasons why the death rate on heroin use is so high is mixing it with fentanyl, which the South American drug cartel is participating in. And that's also being done by the Chinese drug cartel. That is, they're what they, it's a cat and mouse game. It's really interesting with Chinese drug cartel is because with fentanyl, what they'll do is they'll change the molecular structure just enough to where they can call it a different drug, but it isn't. And therefore it's legal to manufacture and then sell, and they sell it illegally over here. And so drug cartels are putting it in there. So, and drug cartels are also profiting off of denying chronic pain patients access to pain medications, which, let's be honest, pain medications are a lot safer than buying drugs from drug cartels. So we can make this safer. We can give testing strips to people who do use heroin, although I'd say it would be even safer if they were getting opiates that were regulated for milligram dosage quality and all that sort of stuff, and not putting things like fentanyl in it at all, and not relying on the drug cartel at all. We can make it safer. And especially today with drugs and medications that can treat opiate use disorder or substance use disorders. And it not only negates their withdrawal symptoms, but makes it so that the opiates don't work at all. So like people who actually seek out treatment can get it. We're not talking about those things. We're not doing those things. We're actually making it harder for people who do want to get clean by making it so that doctors can only prescribe 275 prescriptions of those medications per year. So that's not helpful. That's damaging. So, like I said, the chronic pain patients, if they're not part of the percentage that's committing suicide, then they're part of a percentage that's going on the streets and getting heroin and then overdosing because there's fentanyl in it, or they don't know what they're doing and they take too much and they die. So that's very frustrating. That's very angering. That's very sad. Very anti-humanitarian. But what's happening with the majority of the chronic pain patients, I'd say, is that they're existing in pain and they've lost faith in the system in its entirety. You know, the healthcare system, health insurance, and the government. That's what I was going to say at one point, was the study that these doctors are citing was that, I think it's called the Zulu study. That study was not done in academia. That study was done by board members of the government agency of the CDC. And I'm not saying that everything the CDC does is crap. I'm saying that this specific thing the CDC is doing is crap. And let's keep in mind the CDC is not perfect. The CDC has done unethical things in the past, like injecting people with they infected an entire population of black African American males with syphilis and watched them slowly die. So no, the CDC is no angel. They're not angels. They have done unethical things in the past, and the study that they're citing was done by the CDC anti-opiate zealot panel, and not an academia free from any kind of political or corporate interest. So that's something that should be noted. And no, I'm not speaking up for Purdue Pharma. What Purdue Pharma did was bad. They participated in a very dirty marketing tactic, and Purdue Pharma absolutely should have been held accountable for what they did, and it's a good thing that they were. But saying that Purdue Pharma and that opiate pain medications are responsible for the opiate epidemic, it's like, where's your proof on that? Again, that's starting with a conclusion and then trying to data mine to build a premise to support that conclusion. That's outright fallacious. That's not how we do science. That's not how we conduct studies. That's not how we do logic and critical thinking. And no legitimate study should ever, like, especially if you're going to base legislation, it should not be done that way. So, real problem. Like I said, even in that Zulu study, they still used an opiate medication. They were using tramadol. So, that's what I have to say about this, and I think it's really embarrassing that someone like me, I am not a medical educator. I am not a medical professor. My knowledge and study in medical science is very limited, probably, especially compared to these two. And the fact that I can debunk them just on logic and critical thinking or philosophy alone is embarrassing. It should be embarrassing. I mean, this is really bad. It's really bad when I can look at this video, and I'm serious. I watched the video and I was frustrated. I keep getting frustrated at these people because they cannot explain why there are so many people that have been exposed to opiates, whether they be pain medication, whether it be heroin addiction, get clean, and they're fine. I want an explanation for this, and why there's so many of them, and why they don't want to talk about it. I find it very frustrating because they're talking about getting rid of pain medications for all of chronic pain patients, or just getting rid of opiate pain medications in their entirety, off of what, 6% of an already fractionalized percentage of the population? That's pretty drastic. And so you better be sure that's what's causing the opiate epidemic, and I don't think it is. I really don't. I just illustrated to you, and there's actually a band called Christian Death by Valor. He released an album called The American Inquisition when this happened, and the whole album was about an explosion of heroin use across Western countries because George W. Bush Jr. went to war with these terrorist organizations that were policing opiate farmers. And it's just progressed on from there. I'm sure the drug cartel look at doctors like this and say, keep going. We're making tons of money off of you. And I don't know that that's the right thing to do. So that's my stance. So oh, Again, I'll leave a link. I encourage you to go and watch it for yourself. Correct me if I'm wrong. Give me answers if you have them. And if you agree with me, voice your opinion to these people. They've removed my comment once already. I don't know why. There's other comments on there. Like all the comments that are on there are disagreeing with the video, just in shorter words. I'm the only one that had their comment removed. So that's why I'm not showing any clips. I'm not taking chances. It's like, I think I've already made these people mad. And I don't know why. I think these are legitimate questions and legitimate critiques. And I really want to know why this 94% cannot be explained. I really want to know. And I think, like I said, if you're going to have a legitimate statistical study or scientific study, especially when you're talking about taking away pain medications entirely, like opiate pain medications, you better have a really good reason. And if 94% of people that get exposed to them, nothing bad ever happens to them, you're doing the wrong thing. That's my take on it. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. And like, share, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. Go and dislike this video. Dislike it. It's embarrassing, and it's not something that should come out of academia. It's not. If I can debunk it just using logic and critical thinking and philosophy, it's embarrassing, and it's not something that should be published on an academic YouTube channel for academia. It's a presentation, and they're using it to pass legislation and political policy. That's bad. It's really bad, and it's got to stop. Okay. Let me reiterate, if you haven't already, like, okay, so heroin addicts are dying by the dozens. There's tons of them that want to get clean, and they don't have access to the medications that'll help them because of regulations stopping limiting the prescribing of all opiates together. Opiates are safer than heroin use, so you've got chronic pain patients that are turning to heroin. They're dying that way. Suicide rates in chronic pain patients is up 470%. So, I mean, is getting rid of pain medication really a good idea? I don't think so. I think opiate pain medications prescribed by a doctor is definitely way safer than the people who are getting heroin from off the street that could be cut with fentanyl. And I would be willing to bet that people who use heroin will tell you there is a big difference between opiate medications prescribed by a doctor and heroin and fentanyl. All right, thanks. I'm out.